The movie opens with James Wright, a former soldier on a personal mission. He breaks into a martial arts school, searching for a man from his past. But things quickly spiral out of control. The man he's looking for is long gone, and the current sensei, his son, refuses to let an outsider disgrace his family's honor. He orders his students to attack, but the plan backfires. James moves with ruthless precision, taking them down one after another until the sensei realizes this isn't some reckless brawl. Calling off his men, he demands to know who this stranger really is. Before the answer comes, the story shifts back to 1942, when Japan was finishing construction on a brutal prison camp called the March of Death, part of its conquest across Southeast Asia. In the chaos, a younger James stands over the grave of his fallen comrade, the man he just buried with his own hands. But the war gives no rest. The next morning, Japanese troops sweep through the jungle, hunting survivors. Hiding in the shadows, James tricks them with a tossed stone, then launches a fierce counterattack, killing one soldier and triggering a mine. For a brief moment, he seems to have the upper hand, until he's surrounded by a much larger force. Out of options, he throws his knife in defiance, only for the commanding officer to stop his men. "Take the British soldier alive," he orders coldly. Inside the camp, prisoners pass time by making spiders fight, the only entertainment left in their dying world. But when James arrives, the air changes. The colonel immediately recognizes him, a former commander in the British Air Force, a man born to lead, not obey. To keep order, he decides James must die, quietly, without witnesses. At first, James appears calm, ready to accept his fate. But when the executioner's blade falls, he strikes with lightning speed, dodging the sword and taking down 3 guards in a blur of motion. Once again, James ran through the dense jungle, branches tearing at his clothes as he fought to escape. He stumbled upon the wreckage of a downed plane, a haunting reminder of his fallen squadron. But his freedom didn't last long. A sudden rustle in the darkness startled him. His knife slipped from his hand, and in the next second, he fell into a hidden trap, dragged back to camp, beaten and bound. He was paraded before the colonel, the man whose soldiers he had killed. The colonel studied him coldly, ripping the dog tag from James's neck. Beneath his belt, he discovered a medal for heroism, a symbol of valor and command. Impressed, the colonel changed his mind. Instead of execution, he ordered James to be taken to the barracks to rest. But mercy in this place never lasted. By morning, James would face another deadly test, one he was never meant to survive. That night, a guard whispered about killing him in his sleep, but the colonel refused. He wanted everyone to witness what happened to those who defied him. Fear was his weapon, and James would be his next example. Locked in a cramped cell, James met a small group of other prisoners, mostly Americans. Among them were 2 he'd remember, a bearded man and another named Gabriel. They spoke quietly, clinging to hope that the British army might come to rescue them. James didn't answer. Deep down, he knew no one was coming. His plane had crashed into the sea. Command likely assumed all hands were lost. The prisoners told him how life in the camp worked. Every day followed strict rules, enforced through pain and obedience. Tomorrow, they said, he'd meet Captain Collins, the man in charge of discipline. But James already knew what awaited him. He had killed Japanese soldiers during his escape. There would be no forgiveness. Still, a part of him dreamed of escaping again, until the men warned him it was impossible. The camp sat on an isolated island, surrounded by towers, guards, and unforgiving waters. Anyone who tried to flee was caught, beaten, and dragged back. This was where the strongest prisoners were sent, their strength used to build walls and fortifications for their captors. Far to the north, rumors spread of another camp, known only as the March of Death. No one knew what truly happened there, only that no prisoner ever returned. At sunrise, the compound roared to life. Soldiers trained in perfect formation, boots pounding against the dirt in unison. The air was thick with tension and the sting of discipline. Then came the hour of punishment. James was dragged into the courtyard, hands bound. But before the crowd, the colonel ordered his ropes cut, saving him for something greater. The true spectacle was yet to begin. 2 other prisoners were brought forward, accused of stealing an extra ration of food. Their punishment wasn't execution, but something worse, a fight to the death against the camp's champion, a man built like a machine, whose every strike could shatter bone. The brutal match was a warning, a reminder of what happened to anyone who dared to defy the empire of the rising sun. When it ended, the crowd waited for the final act. the execution of James Wright. Against such a monstrous opponent, he wasn't expected to last a minute. Yet within seconds, James dropped the fighter with just 2 clean, precise strikes. Silence fell. The colonel said nothing. Without a word, he turned and walked back to his tent. Inside, his aide argued that James should suffer, that no enemy soldier deserved mercy, but the colonel's expression said otherwise. Behind his stern eyes was something unexpected: respect. Still, he promised that James's time would come soon enough. Later that night, James met Captain Collins, who couldn't hide his shock at the newcomer's skill. The prisoners shared a rare moment of relief, passing around a bottle of homemade liquor, so strong it burned like fire. But before the laughter could take root, Japanese soldiers burst in, ordering James to report to the colonel. Inside the command tent, a young nurse was sorting supplies. For a brief moment, her eyes met James's. A flicker of humanity in a place ruled by cruelty. But the colonel hadn't called him there for praise. He had recognized the fighting style James used, an ancient technique once banned in Japan. Then he revealed something deeper. The medal James carried wasn't truly his. It had belonged to his father. The colonel admitted his own father had also been a war hero. The moment turned cold. Drawing his fallen officer's katana, the colonel made a shallow cut across James's shoulder and ordered him back to his cell. The message was clear. His death was set for dawn. When morning came, the colonel arranged another fight. Knowing James's technique wasn't built for multiple enemies, he sent 3 of his strongest men to finish the job. But once again, James fought like a storm, swift, precise, unstoppable. In less than a minute, all 3 were on the ground. Yet when he had the chance to kill, he didn't. He stepped back. He refused. The colonel watched in silence, then left the arena without a word. Moments later, gunfire echoed through the camp. The defeated fighters had been executed. Punishment for losing. James's quiet act of mercy had sealed their fate. That night, James sat in the camp's makeshift bar, his voice heavy with guilt. They weren't cowards, he said quietly. They were just following orders, trying to survive. But time was running out. Gabriel and Collins were growing weaker, and soon they'd be sent north to the March of Death, a place no one ever returned from. Desperate, James devised a plan. He'd seen a radio atop the watchtower. If they could reach it, they might be able to contact the British forces off the coast, maybe even call for rescue. The men agreed. During the next work shift, they created a distraction, shouting, fighting, drawing the guards' attention. When the soldier from the tower climbed down to stop the chaos, James made his move. Sprinting across the yard, he scaled the tower, ripped the radio from its mount, and ducked behind a stack of sandbags. One shot, one message could mean their freedom. Just as James prepared to leave, he was spotted by the nurse, the same woman he'd seen before. Moments later, when a soldier tried to harass her, she refused his touch and took a slap across the face for it. Yet even through the pain, she never betrayed him. Back in the barracks, James hid the radio, and the men decided to wait before sending any signal. For now, they simply listened, hoping to catch a voice from the British or American forces out at sea. But the next morning brought trouble. The colonel ordered an unplanned assembly, determined to find out who had tried to escape. Among the prisoners, one man seemed too nervous. That night, James confronted him and learned the truth. The man had discovered a small blind spot along the camp's fence and created a hidden opening. Using that chance, James prepared to move. He left a dummy on his bed to fool the guards and slipped out with the bearded man's quiet help. For the first time in months, he stepped beyond the camp's walls. When a guard later entered the cell and noticed James was gone, he met the bearded man's steady, warning stare and said nothing. Moving carefully through the jungle, James finally reached the coast. Through the radio's static, he heard faint voices speaking Navajo, the secret code of American forces. Following the sound, he came across the same crashed plane he'd found during his earlier escape. Near its wreckage was a metal towing hook, and with it, a dangerous idea began to form. The next morning, James gathered the prisoners. He told them what he discovered. The Navajo voices meant Allied forces were close, maybe preparing an attack. He also revealed something else. Deep in the forest, he had found what looked like a functional glider. If they could attach it to a passing aircraft, they might actually escape. The plan sounded mad, but desperation has its own logic. They agreed to try. Their moment of hope didn't last. Soldiers stormed in and dragged James before Colonel Ito. The colonel, having overheard the Navajo transmissions himself, believed James could translate them. But James knew nothing, and even if he did, he'd never betray his country. Enraged, Ito ordered his men to tie him up and beat him until he dropped. Blow after blow echoed through the tent, each strike breaking bone and will alike. When James finally collapsed, the guards untied him to finish the punishment with their fists. That's when he struck back. Fast, precise, and unrelenting. Despite his injuries, he took the guards down, one by one, right in front of the colonel. Humiliated, Ito stormed into the center of the camp and executed several workers on the spot, declaring that the rest would suffer fates worse than death. James blacked out soon after. 2 days later, he awoke in the infirmary. His body was broken, but still breathing, kept alive by order of the colonel himself. The nurse tending his wounds was the same woman, Teresa. She had been working in the camp for months, trapped like the prisoners, surviving on quiet defiance. Just as James tried to speak, a soldier entered, separating them without a word. That night, half conscious on his cot, James was jolted awake by the sound of gunfire. A blade flashed inches from his face. Colonel Ito stood over him, conducting yet another execution to remind everyone that fear still ruled the camp. But beneath that cold performance, one thing became clear. The colonel's cruelty wasn't just about control anymore. It was personal. The colonel never planned to quietly kill James. Every trial, every staged fight was part of a ritual, an honorable way to make him die by the blade. The same code his sensei had taught him. James, bruised but unbroken, met the challenge with defiance. If those were the colonel's best men, he'd still find his way home. Ito's face never changed. He warned that if Japan lost, no one from the camp would live to tell the tale. He would burn the place down with them rather than surrender. That morning, the prisoners stirred with a sliver of hope. Allied planes had flown overhead and dropped leaflets, calling out Japanese crimes and promising accountability. But James's expression hardened when he repeated Ito's threat. Surrender was not an option for the colonel. If defeat came, he'd make sure everyone perished. The leaflets felt like a cruel tease against the colonel's resolve. Late one night, Gabriel slipped out to check the glider. Returning, he met James and tried to take a different path back. A lone guard spotted them. In the scramble, they were forced to kill him to avoid capture. The noise brought a non-commissioned officer. James, recognizing the man's reputation, chose mercy instead of murder. The officer helped them back into the barracks, then betrayed them by reporting the earlier killing. Soldiers tore into the prisoners' quarters, and the camp froze while the colonel planned his response. To protect the others, James stepped forward and claimed responsibility. The colonel demanded proof. Use the band technique. But when a fellow prisoner refused to be humiliated, the guards executed him with a single shot. Captain Collins was ordered to fight next. Like James, he beat the petty force sent to break him. Herded back like animals, the prisoners faced the colonel again. In the tense standoff, James called him a coward and demanded a fair duel. The colonel lunged unpredictably, then abruptly had James dragged out into the open, a public spectacle and a final warning. That night, James and Gabriel slipped away for real, moving through the jungle toward the coast. They spoke in a messy mix of languages to hide their plant from patrols, folding pleas for help into ordinary words. Desperation gave them courage, and whatever came next would be their only chance. Sunrise. Their plan was desperate but simple. Steal a signal rocket, fire it, and hope a passing plane would spot them. If it worked, the aircraft could tow the glider James had discovered, lifting them off the island. It was their one and only shot at freedom. When James and Gabriel returned to the barracks, something felt wrong. The bunks were overturned, the lights out, the place eerily silent. Before they could react, soldiers burst in and knocked them unconscious. They woke to the thunder of engines overhead. Planes roared low across the sky as nurses looked up, eyes filled with hope. The Americans had come. Moments later, the island erupted in chaos. Explosions shook the ground. The long-awaited assault had begun. Colonel Ito snapped. Enraged, he turned his fury on everyone, soldiers and prisoners alike. Amid the gunfire, James realized their only hope was the radio tower. The main radio was destroyed, but maybe the transmitter up top still worked. The nurses, braver than anyone expected, lured a guard close and killed him, clearing the path. James and Gabriel climbed the tower as bullets cracked through the air. Gabriel started sending an SOS signal while the camp below descended into madness. James couldn't stand by. He picked up a rifle and joined the fight, firing at the guards to give the prisoners a chance. The revolt spread fast. Men fought with anything they could find, desperate for freedom. In the chaos, Captain Collins faced the officer who tormented them for months. He fought with everything he had, and won, only to be shot in the back moments later. Fury burning through him, James stormed the command tent. Colonel Ito stood waiting, sword in hand. Their duel was fierce and raw, two men driven by duty, pride, and pain. When it ended, Ito lay defeated, and James stood trembling, bloodied but alive. Gabriel pulled him away as the roar of aircraft grew louder. A soldier raised his rifle to fire, but Ito stepped forward and lowered the weapon, his final act of honor. James and Gabriel raced through the burning jungle toward the glider, their last hope of escape and their first breath of freedom. Above them, American aircraft circled for one final attack. Seconds later, gunfire rained down as Japanese troops charged through the trees. The clearing erupted in chaos. Bullets ripped through the air, striking down every soldier, even the young guard who had once shown mercy. Through the smoke, James seized the tow cable and hooked it to the glider. A U.S. plane swooped past, the line caught, and the glider soared into the sky. As the island shrank beneath them, James and Gabriel made a silent vow. They would return one day to save those still trapped in camps, like the one they'd escaped. Years later, that promise brought James to a quiet martial arts school in Japan. He had come searching for the man who once trained Colonel Ito. The current sensei dismissed his students and listened as James told his story. With calm respect, the man revealed that his father, the old master, had died a year earlier. But before his death, he spoke of a foreigner who would one day arrive carrying the forbidden techniques of their lineage. At the master's request, James demonstrated the movements. Precise, fluid, deadly, yet filled with restraint. The sensei watched in silence, understanding that every strike carried history, pain, and purpose. Then, honoring his father's final wish, he brought out a small wooden box. Inside were a medal and a dog tag, relics that once belonged to James's father. No words were needed. The exchange was simple, respectful. Two warriors, once enemies, now bound by honor. For a brief moment, the past was at peace, and with that, the story reached its end. A tale of courage, redemption, and the quiet strength that endures long after the battle is over. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. It truly helps the channel grow and keeps stories like this alive.